Hello again, everyone. Pastor Bob here with this week's installment of the Midweek Bible Break. We've been in the midst of the Jacob story, and we're coming into the part of the Jacob story that leads to his naming as Israel and the birth of the sons who will become the 12 tribes of Israel. This coming Sunday, we're going to be looking at Jacob's confrontation with God before he goes and has his confrontation with Esau as he returns to the land of Canaan. But I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about these intervening chapters, what happens with Jacob once he gets to Haran and he meets his cousin Rachel, who he falls in love with, and a lot of other things happen. We're going to see that Jacob, the deceiver, becomes deceived by his uncle Laban. It seems that this deception runs in this family since Jacob is Rebekah's son and Laban is Rebekah's brother. We've got a lot of family system stuff going on here, and it's very interesting. So let's dive into the text here a little bit. We get into Genesis chapter 29, and we have what I would call a meet cute. That's sort of a romantic comedy term that indicates that the couple meets in an interesting way here at the well. Now, of course, we've already seen that Rebekah meets Isaac's servant, Abraham's servant, at the well, and that's where she is taken. This might be the same well where she is taken back to Canaan and becomes Isaac's wife. Now we have Jacob going to Haran and meeting Rachel here at a well as well. Well, pun intended, I guess. Jacob arrives in Haran. He goes to the well, this echo of Genesis 24. And the wells in the ancient world were places of social meeting. People got together. We see this in John chapter 4, for example, where the woman at the well comes in the middle of the day, which was unusual. She would have usually come in the morning or in the evening when all the other women of the village would have come at the same time. That would have been a social time to water, to take water back, to water animals and things like that. But this is where Jacob is going to meet Rachel. She is a shepherdess. She's coming to water the sheep. And he discovers that Laban, the uncle, is alive and well, and that this is his daughter Rachel. The other shepherds tell him this, and Rachel is thus Jacob's first cousin. And Jacob is going to go and stay with Laban, who extends his hospitality to his kinsman. And there, Jacob is going to fall in love with Rachel. She's beautiful, and he's going to want to marry her. Again, this is Hallmark-worthy kind of stuff right here. But then it gets a little weird. So there's another sister, Leah, who's the older sister, and she is known as someone who has weak eyes or delicate eyes. Her name means delicate or weary. So she is the older sister, and then you've got Rachel, the younger sister. Her name means ewe or female sheep. She's a shepherdess. She's the younger daughter. So we have these two girls, and Jacob wants to marry the younger one, which is really not the custom, but he's willing to go to the mat for her. So he agrees on a bride price, and this bride price is going to be paid by his labor. Now, normally a family would pay the bride price. The groom's family would pay the bride price. Usually it ran around 30 or 40 shekels, pretty high. But Jacob offers to work for Laban, his uncle, for 7 years to have Rachel as his wife. So he's going to be paying exponentially more for his right to marry Rachel. So he's going to work those 7 years, and then comes the wedding night, finally. Can you imagine waiting 7 years of engagement till finally getting to the wedding night? And in that age, the wedding custom was that there was no formal ceremony. There was simply a wedding feast that was followed by the couple going in to consummate the marriage. The bride would be veiled. The celebration probably included lots of feasting and heavy drinking. But the way this works is that they go in at night, and I love how the writer of Genesis puts it. Basically, when he awoke in the morning, there was Leah, not Rachel, whom he expected. it certainly had something to do with veils and heavy drinking, that it was not the runaway bride, but a switched bride on Jacob. So he winds up sleeping with Leah, and he's deceived. The trickster has now been tricked by his uncle Laban, and Jacob now was going to have to work another 7 years for Rachel. And there are also going to be concubines, maids of Leah and Rachel, who enter the picture as well. So Jacob is going to be involved essentially now with 4 women, 2 sisters, and 2 concubines. And that leads to the birth of all these children who are going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is a recurring theme again here in Genesis, that Leah is unloved and she's the firstborn. Remember the story of Abraham and Hagar, where Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham so that she can produce an heir for him. The same is true here with Jacob and Leah. Now, Leah is going to wind up having 4 sons, saying that she's unloved. She's seeking Jacob's love. She's trying to earn his love by having children. Jacob must have had some regard for her because he's having lots of children with her. But the first one is named Reuben, which means behold a son. Then Simeon, God has heard. Levi, joined or attached. And Judah, praise or thanksgiving. So she is legitimizing her role as the mother of these patriarchs by default. In effect, she is the one who's fruitful while Rachel is barren. And that's going to cause conflict because Rachel is jealous of Leah. She says to Jacob, give me children or I will die. And so as a way of getting in on the heirs, she is going to give her servant Bilhah to Jacob to conceive. And she does. She conceives a son named Dan, which means judgment or judged. She says, God, judge between you and me. Rachel then sees this as vindication. Her servant girl has had a son for Jacob, so she's vindicated. She has a second son then, the servant Bilhah, and that son is Naphtali, which means my struggle. She says, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So Rachel is using her maid, who becomes Jacob's secondary wife or concubine, to have these children because she's not able to have them herself. Well, at this point, Leah stops having children, so she also gives her servant Zilpah to Jacob, and she bears Gad, which means luck or fortune, and Asher, which means happy or blessed. So you have this kind of complicated competition going on here between these sisters to see who is going to be the most legitimate, who's going to have the sons that matter to Jacob. And that leads to the very strange story here in chapter 30, verses 14 to 21, where Reuben finds some mandrakes in a field. Now, mandrakes, if you're familiar with the Harry Potter series, that becomes a thing in there too. But in the ancient world, these were considered to be an aphrodisiac. Now, the interesting thing is they're not native to Mesopotamia. They are native to the land of Canaan. So there might be some crossover here or some confusion about them. But nonetheless, whatever plant it is, it's called a mandrake and it's considered to be an aphrodisiac. When Rachel wants these mandrakes because she thinks that this is going to make her fertile or to make Jacob be able to impregnate her. So she buys these mandrakes from Leah in order to, who is the mother of Reuben, in order to enhance her own fertility. But in doing so, the price is she allows Leah to sleep with Jacob again so that she can have these mandrakes. And so when Jacob sleeps with Leah, she conceives again and has 2 more sons, Issachar, which means reward, and Zebulun, a gift from God. And she also gives birth to a daughter named Dinah. So again, this is worthy of any soap opera you might imagine. In fact, there's a story, a novel called The Red Tent, which kind of gets into some of this in an interesting way. But again, this is really out of our realm, but it's interesting theater. Well, Rachel finally conceives. In chapter 30, verse 22, God remembered Rachel and she is going to bear Joseph. God shall add. And as we're going to see in our Lent series, Joseph is going to become Jacob's favorite son because he is the first son born to Rachel. Remember, he loves Rachel. Leah got thrown in as Laban's deception. There are these other children that are being born to these servant girls, but Joseph is the one who becomes the favorite, and that's going to cause conflict in the family as well. Rachel prays for another son. She's eventually going to have another son named Benjamin. He's going to be the last of those sons, but Rachel is going to die in childbirth with Benjamin, which is a hard blow for Jacob, obviously. Well, Jacob is going to increase in wealth. He requests then to leave Laban's employ because now that Rachel is born a son, the family's complete. She is now protected. She is now connected to his family, and he wants to leave to go back to Canaan. God has told him to go back to Canaan and to confront his brother Esau, as this is part of the covenant promise. But Laban wants to retain Jacob, so he offers him a deal. You can keep the spotted and speckled sheep and goats as your wage. Now, usually in a flock like that, most of the sheep would be all white or the goats would be all black. But Laban then hides these animals from Jacob, so there are very few of them. So he's actually ripping him off by hiding all these spotted and speckled goats. So Jacob is not getting what he was promised. Well, Jacob responds with a scheme of his own. He's going to selectively breed more speckled and spotted livestock. He's going to put something in the water. He's going to strip the branch of a tree, put that in the water, which is kind of folk medicine to have these sheep and goats produce different colored animals. And he's going to wind up increasing his wealth significantly so that he has his own flocks to be able to work from. And once he gets enough of those flocks together, he hears from God, go back to your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So now Jacob has become prosperous himself. He's ready to go back and continue on this covenant promise. And his wives are going to go with him, as well as the children and the herds. Leah and Rachel seem to be angry with their father over the way the inheritance has been handled. And Rachel also is going to steal her father's household gods, which were likely talismans of prosperity and fertility. So there's a lot of deception, there's a lot of thievery, there's a lot of sleight of hand going on here. Again, Jacob the trickster is being tricked and still tricking. Laban's going to pursue Jacob. There's an agreement to part, signified by a standing stone. They set up this stone, and the word is, may the Lord watch between you and me while we are absent one from another. I remember as a kid growing up, going to my grandparents' church, this little church in Tunnelton, Pennsylvania, and they used to use that verse as their parting sort of benediction for Sunday school. May the Lord watch between you and me while we are absent one from another. Well, the context of that is, I'm watching you, don't screw up. Don't screw up. Don't cross over the border here. So it's a little bit taken out of context from that perspective. Well, what we see in this story is that you've got repeats of what happened to Esau now happening to Jacob. There's a food swap. Remember, Jacob sold Esau a bowl of soup for his birthright. Rachel sells out Jacob for some mandrakes. The user becomes used. That's the way this text portrays it. Then you have this stealing of the inheritance. Jacob steals Esau's blessing in that crazy story about him putting on animal skins and smelling like his brother and deceiving their blind father Isaac. Well, Jacob is now going to be swindled out of his inheritance by Laban, though he will eventually turn the tables. So the deceiver, Jacob, becomes the deceived, but then he turns the tables on Laban by escaping. So again, what is Jacob's character like? We know he's shrewd. We know he's really making things difficult. But at the same time, he is moving the covenant promise along, and God promised to be with him, and God is going to be with him through all these twists and turns to bring him back to Canaan for the purpose of making this covenant promise go forward. This land is important in the rest of the story. So what do we learn from this text? Well, do we learn what comes around goes around? Is this a karma kind of text? The Bible isn't really about karma, my friends, but it is about the fact that oftentimes what we do does tend to come back on us. God is making a way forward despite all the scheming. And God is ultimately the source of Jacob's success. Jacob would not have been able to produce those flocks without God's help, all these sons without God's help. Jacob will not be able to escape the consequences of his actions, neither will we. And those are important things for us to remember. Now, the story is going to move from here and go back to Canaan, where Jacob is going to confront his brother Esau, and they're going to reconcile together, which is a very powerful moment. But they're going to reconcile, but they're not going to be together. So it's a different sort of reconciliation. Esau is going to found a nation of his own, Edom, that's eventually going to be in conflict with Israel. But the story of Jacob on the way home is what we're going to dive into on Sunday when we get to his encounter by the Jabbok River. He sends his family across the river, all these flocks as kind of a gift to Esau to soften him up before he finally meets him. But there beside the river, Jacob is going to wind up wrestling with God that night, literally wrestling with God. And that's the text we're going to look at this Sunday. So the deceiver becomes deceived, but ultimately he is going to triumph. He's going to triumph, and the covenant is going to go through him. So I hope you'll join me on Sunday as we dive deeper into the Jacob story. You might want to go back and read these chapters 29 to 31, to see all the twists and turns. And it's good to have a good Bible commentary there with you, or a study Bible to help you kind of keep the players with the program, and also to recognize some of the symbolism of what's going on here and all this deception. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Have a great week.